The roar of the engine was the first violation. A predator's growl tearing through the village's tranquil afternoon symphony of cicadas and distant cowbells. A gleaming black Maybach, slick as polished obsidian, navigated the final dusty stretch of road before coming to a stop. It was an alien vessel that had landed in another world, and the villagers, pausing their work, gathered at a respectful distance to stare. When the door opened, Lin Xian emerged. He stood for a moment, letting his eyes adjust, his posture radiating an impatient authority that was as out of place as his hand-stitched Italian suit. He checked his Patek Philippe, a subtle flick of the wrist that screamed of boardrooms and deadlines, not bucolic idols. A fine layer of ochre dust was already settling on his pristine loafers. He suppressed a grimace. "Is that him? The one for Xiaoman?" A woman whispered loudly to her neighbor. "Looks like a movie star." "Our Xiaoman is a lucky girl." Lin Xian's jaw tightened. He wasn't a movie star. And he certainly wasn't lucky. He was a man on a mission. A tactical strike to neutralize a ridiculous family obligation so he could get back to his life. An overeager, beaming, hurried out to greet him, ushering him past the gawking crowd and into the Zhuang family courtyard. "Lin Xian, you're finally here. Come in, come in." Xiaoman is waiting, inside. The air was thick with the scent of dried herbs and wood smoke. Zhuang Xiaoman was not waiting. She was perched on a stool, sharpening a blade against a whetstone with sharp, rhythmic strokes, her knuckles white. She didn't look up, but she felt his presence, a sterile, expensive cologne that cut through the familiar smells of her home. He was a disruption in every sense. When she finally lifted her head, her gaze was as sharp and unyielding as the steel in her hands. She took in his tailored perfection, the condescending set of his mouth, and felt the hot surge of defiance. This was the man her grandfather had shackled her to in some bygone era. This city peacock. Lin Xian wasted no time on pleasantries. He dismissed the aunt with a curt nod and addressed Xiaoman as if she were a hostile board member. "Let's not drag this out," he began, his voice smooth but edged with steel. He pulled a folder from his briefcase. "This engagement is a farce, a relic of a forgotten time. I am prepared to offer a generous settlement to dissolve it immediately. We sign, we go to the registrar tomorrow, and we can both forget this ever happened." He slid a document across the worn wooden table, a pre-written annulment agreement. A quake, clean divorce. The word hung in the air, heavy and insulting. Divorce, as if they were already bound. As if this were a mere transaction. Xiaoman's sharpening stone fell silent. A slow, dangerous anger burned in her eyes. She pushed the document back across the table with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated. "First," she said, her voice dangerously low, "there is no we. Second, you waltz into my home and talk about divorce as if you're buying a piece of land you don't want." She stood up, her small frame radiating a formidable energy that made him instinctively straighten. "Let me be perfectly clear. Even if you were the last man on earth, and the fate of humanity depended on it, I would never marry someone like you." The escalating pitch of their voices drew her parents from the back room, their faces etched with concern. The argument spilled out into the courtyard, a collision of his cold arrogance and her fiery pride. It was loud enough that the curious villagers drew closer, their whispers turning into a low murmur. The spectacle was cut short by the arrival of a police scooter, a local officer dismounting with a weary sigh. "What's all the commotion, Uncle Zhuang?" Another argument with the Li family over the water rights. Before anyone could explain, Lin Xian stepped forward, his patience shredded. "Officer, this is a private matter. This woman is refusing to dissolve an archaic, non-binding arrangement." The officer, a man who knew every family history in a 10-mile radius, raised an eyebrow. "Non-binding, son. Your grandfathers registered your betrothal with the township when you were children. Down here, That's as good as a marriage certificate. Lin Xian stared, his composure finally cracking. Registered, legally, his grandfather had conveniently omitted that detail. As if on cue, his phone vibrated. The caller ID read, "Chairman." He stepped away, his back rigid, and answered. His grandfather's voice was like ice water. "I heard you arrived. I also heard you tried to buy your way out. You have insulted the Zhuang family and shamed me. Until you learn humility and resolve this with the respect it deserves, your position as general manager is suspended. Your cards are frozen. Don't call me." The line went dead. Lin Xian stood frozen, the phone in his hands suddenly feeling like a useless brick. Suspended, cards frozen. He was stranded. The villager's stares now felt less like curiosity and more like scorching judgment. His carefully constructed world had just been dismantled with a single phone call in a dusty courtyard he couldn't wait to leave. Humiliation was a foreign and bitter taste. An hour later, he was dragging his silver Rimour suitcase down the main dirt road, the wheels choking on pebbles and dust. His driver had been sent away. There was no hotel, not even a guest house. There was nothing, just endless fields and the mocking chirps of insects. He was contemplating the sheer insanity of his situation when a voice called out behind him. It was Xiaoman's father. "Young man, it's getting dark. It's not right for you to have nowhere to go. We have a spare room." Lin Xian turned, his pride warring with his desperation. Beside her father, Xiaoman stood with her arms crossed, her expression a thundercloud of pure irritation. The last thing either of them wanted was this. But he had no money, no car, and no choice. He swallowed the bitter pill and nodded. The spare room was a converted storage space at the back of the house, filled with old furniture draped in white cloths, like ghosts of a life he couldn't comprehend. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of light from a bare bulb. Xiaoman tossed a folded quilt onto a narrow wooden bed. It was old, patched, and smelled faintly of sun and mothballs. "Be careful," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "A speck of dust might permanently damage your $1,000 suit." "Is this quilt from the Qing dynasty?" He shot back, prodding it suspiciously. "Does it come with its own ecosystem?" She ignored him, turning to leave, then she stopped at the door. "Look," she said, her tone shifting from mockery to grudging pragmatism. "I don't want you here any more than you want to be here. But you're stuck." She faced him. "So here's the deal. I'll let you stay for the night. In return, first thing tomorrow, you are going to help me convince my parents and the village elders to break this ridiculous engagement. We work together to get what we both want." Lin Xian looked from her determined face to the dusty, primitive room that was to be his prison for the night. It was an alliance born of mutual desperation, a truce. "Fine," he agreed, the word feeling like grit in his mouth. "Tomorrow, we end this." He had no way of knowing that for him. It had only just begun. The morning sun had barely crested the mountains when the sound of battle erupted from the courtyard. Zhuang Xiaoman's out, her voice a sharp-edged tool, was on the offensive. "What do you mean?" "She's not going," she shrieked, waving her phone like a weapon. "Peter Wong is a photographer. He's traveled. He has prospects, not just dirt." She gestured vaguely towards the fields, as if the very soil was an insult. Xiaoman's mother, a woman worn smooth by years of appeasement, wrung her hands. "MEI. She has an arrangement. That city boy who sleeps past sunrise and looks like he'd break a nail opening a bottle. That's not an arrangement. It's a joke." Xiaoman, who had been quietly cleaning soil from a spade, straightened up, her jaw tight. Before she could speak, a lazy voice cut through the tension. "Who's a joke?" Lin Xian appeared in the doorway, stretching with the languid grace of a panther. He wore a ludicrously expensive silk pajama set, a stark contrast to the rustic setting. He blinked at the scene, a slow, calculated smile spreading across his face. Are we talking about me? I'm flattered, her aunt scoffed. You're the reason my shaman is going to miss out on a real man. Lin Xian's smile widened. He sauntered into the courtyard, deliberately placing himself between shaman and Han. He puffed out his chest in a theatrical display of machismo. Oh, I'm real, he declared, his voice dropping to a low, gravelly parody. I'm the fiance, the wild man from the mountains who eats photographers for breakfast. To punctuate his point, he ran a hand through his impeccably styled hair, messing it into a comical state of disarray. The aunt stared, speechless. Xiaoman's mother hid a gasp behind her hand. Xiaoman herself felt a traitorous bubble of laughter rise in her throat. She pressed her lips together, but her eyes betrayed her amusement. The arrogant CEO was an actor and, infuriatingly, a decent one. The aunt, flustered and outmaneuvered, finally sputtered, "Nonsense," and retreated into the house, muttering about wasted youth. A tense silence fell over the courtyard, broken only by the chirping of crickets. Lin Xian turned to Xiaoman, his suave demeanor returning instantly. "You're welcome, I didn't ask for your help," she retorted, though her voice lacked its usual bite. "Your aunt's voice is a threat to public peace. I was performing a civic duty," he said smoothly. He leaned against a porch column, examining his fingernails. "This, however, is a recurring problem. I propose a contract extension." Xiaoman raised an eyebrow. "What are you talking about?" "Our fake engagement. 1 week isn't believable. Her kind requires a sustained campaign of deterrence. I'll give you 1 month." Her eyes narrowed. "And in return," he said, meeting her gaze, "you convince your grandfather that this whole thing is a terrible idea and let me go back to civilization with a clear conscience." It was a devil's bargain, but it was also a solution. "Fine," Xiaoman conceded. 1 month. "But if you're my fiancé, you act like it." Fiance's help. A wicked glint appeared in her eye. An hour later, Lin Xian deeply regretted his proposal. He stood in the middle of a field, staring down a hand-pushed sea planter as if it were a hostile corporate raider. Dressed in borrowed work clothes that were too short in the arms and too wide in the waist, he looked utterly pathetic. "How hard can it be?" he muttered, grabbing the handles. "It's just dirt," he pushed. The machine lurched, jammed, and then spat a geyser of corn seeds directly into his face. Xiaoman, watching from off the row, slapped her hand over her mouth to stifle her laughter. He glared at her, wiping kernels from his hair, his pride in tatters. He was a man who could command the boardroom of 100 people. Yet he had been defeated by a simple piece of farm equipment. A nascent sense of responsibility warred with his profound frustration. He had made a deal, and for some inexplicable reason, he felt a pull to see it through. That evening, misery found him in a new form. His temporary room, with its old wooden furniture and woven mats, was also home to a thriving population of dust mites. Lin Xian, whose body was a temple of hypoallergenic sheets and purified air, was their new god. A furious, blotchy red rash bloomed across his arms and neck, itching with an intensity that made him want to claw his own skin off. He was tossing and turning on the thin mattress, groaning in defeat, when a shadow fell over his doorway. Xiaoman stood there, holding a small ceramic jar. She looked at his flushed face and the angry red welts on his skin, and her expression softened from its usual state of wary annoyance to something unreadable. "Don't move," she ordered, her voice quiet. She knelt by the bed. The room suddenly felt smaller, charged with an unfamiliar intimacy. He watched as she dipped her fingers into the jar, scooping up a cool, white herbal balm. He flinched when her fingers first touched his heated skin, the contact sending a jolt through him that had nothing to do with the rash. "It's just ointment, not acid," she murmured, her touch surprisingly gentle as she spread the medicine over his arm. Stop squirming. He was a man who hadn't been cared for like this since he was a child. He was used to doctors, prescriptions, efficiency. He was not used to this, the faint scent of herbs and soil on her hands, the focused look in her eyes, the quiet scrape of the ceramic jar. Does it look bad? The question escaped him, laced with a vulnerability he detested. Shaman paused, her gaze lifting to meet his. In the dim light, she saw past the CEO, past the arrogant intruder. She saw a man, miserable and far from home. "You'll live," she said, but her tone was softer than her words. She dabbed another spot on his neck, her knuckles brushing against his jaw. For a brief second, his irritation and her resentment dissolved, replaced by a silent, fragile awareness of the person in front of them. He wasn't just a problem to be solved. She wasn't just an obstacle to his freedom. The next morning, Lin Xian, still blotchy, armed with a stubborn new resolve, appeared in the field where Xiaoman was digging an irrigation ditch. He grabbed a shovel, his movements clumsy and inefficient. He dug with his back instead of his legs, held the tool at an awkward angle, and his first few attempts barely disturbed the packed earth. Xiaoman watched him from a few feet away, leaning on her own shovel. He looked ridiculous. He was covered in dirt, sweating under the morning sun, and clearly in pain. Yet, he didn't stop. He gritted his teeth and kept digging. Her family, working nearby, threw him curious, encouraging glances. She had pegged him as a pampered city boy, dismissive and weak, and he was. But as she watched him clumsily hack at the earth, a reluctant smile touched her lips. Perhaps, she thought, there was something more to him than just a silk pajama set and a silver tongue. He was struggling, failing, and yet, for the first time since he'd arrived, he wasn't trying to run away. He was trying to dig in. The afternoon sun baked the fields, drawing out the rich scent of turned earth. It was this scent, once foreign and coarse, that Lin Xian had begun to associate with a hard-earned peace. But that peace shattered with the arrival of a sleek, dust-free SUV that looked entirely out of place on the narrow village road. A man emerged, tall and effortlessly stylish in a way that made Lin Xian's own expensive but functional work clothes feel clumsy. This was Su Zifeng. "Shaman Zuji," he called out, his voice a smooth, confident baritone that carried across the fields. He beamed, a camera with a lens the size of a cannon slung over his shoulder. Chuang Shaman's head snapped out from the row of vegetables she was tending. A wide, genuine smile broke across her face. "Zifeng, what are you doing here?" Lin Xian, wrestling with a stubborn irrigation pipe nearby, felt the knot tighten in his stomach. Zuji, Senior. The word implied a shared history he couldn't access, a bond forged in lecture halls and student canteens. Far from this world he was just beginning to understand. Su Zifeng jogged over, his boots barely sinking into the soft soil. He embraced Xiaoman in a casual, familiar hug that made Lin Xian's hands clench around the plastic pipe. "My new project is documenting heritage villages. I knew I had to start here, with my most talented senior." He winked, and a few of the village aunties nearby tittered with approval. His gaze swept over to Lin Xian, a flicker of polite assessment in his eyes. "And you are Lin Xian," he said, his voice flat. He wiped a muddy hand on his trousers, a futile gesture. "Ah, the fiancé from the city," Su Zifeng said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Xiaoman told me about you. It must be quite an adjustment. The city is all about efficiency." At here he gestured vaguely at the sprawling fields. "Things move at a different pace, a more natural pace. Not everyone can keep up." The jab was subtle, wrapped in a veneer of friendly observation. But Lin Xian felt it like a splinter under his skin. He was the outsider, the temporary amusement. Su Zifeng, with his easy charm and shared past with Xiaoman, was the real thing. The next hour was a masterclass in exclusion. Xu Zifeng moved around Xiaoman with professional grace, his shutter clicking, capturing her as she worked. He'd adjust a stray strand of her hair, his fingers brushing her cheek, or make a joke that sent her into peals of laughter. Lin Xian felt like a ghost, rooted to the spot, watching a world he was no longer a part of. Then came the performance. As Xu Zifeng framed a shot near a particularly rocky patch of ground, he let out a theatrical yell. He stumbled, twisting his body to cradle the camera as he fell. It hit the ground with a sickening crunch of plastic and glass. "My lens," he cried out, his face a mask of distress. Xiaoman rushed to his side. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. "I'm fine, but damn it." He picked up the camera, showing her the shattered filter and cracked housing. This was a custom lens. "It'll take weeks to get it replaced. I'm stuck." He looked up at her, his expression a perfect blend of frustration and helplessness. "I'm so sorry to impose, Zuji, but is there any chance I could stay for a few days? At least until I can figure out how to get back to the city and sort this out." Lin Xian's jaw tightened. The fall had been too deliberate, the landing too controlled. He saw the flicker of calculation in Xu Zifeng's eyes. A look Xiaoman, in her kindness, completely missed. That evening, the tension in Xiaoman's small house was thick enough to choke on. Xu Zifeng had made himself at home, regaling Xiaoman's grandmother with stories from his travels. Lin Xian sat in a corner, nursing a cup of tea, his phone buzzing insistently in his pocket. He finally retreated outside, the cool night air a welcome relief. The caller ID flashed a name he dreaded. "Lu Yao. Enjoying your rustic vacation, darling." Her voice was like ice chips scraping against glass. "What do you want, Lu Yao?" "I want you to stop this nonsense and come back. Your little game is over. That ridiculous engagement ended. Our competitor, Tianheng Group, just made a move on the seaport logistics bid. A very aggressive move. Your board is panicking. They need their CEO, not some farmer." Lin Xian's knuckles turned white as he gripped the phone. "I have things handled. Do you?" she purred. "Because I hear you're quite preoccupied. If you're not back in my office by of the week to sign the merger papers and announce our engagement, our real engagement, I'll make sure Tianheng gets that contract. Your grandfather's legacy will be a footnote in their annual report. Think about your choice, Xian. Your corporate empire, or your village girl." The line went dead. He stood there, the threat echoing in the silence, a cold dread seeping into his bones. The next day, the sabotage began. Lin Xian was trying to help Xiaoman move sacks of organic fertilizer. As he hoisted one onto his shoulder, Xu Zifeng accidentally bumped into him while lining up a shot. The sack tipped, spilling a foul-smelling cascade of fertilizer all over Lin Xian's boots and trousers. "Oh, my apologies," Xu Zifeng said, his camera hiding his smirk. "Clumsy of me. That was the final straw. You did that on purpose." Lin Xian snapped, brushing the filth off him. "Why would I do that?" Xu Zifeng asked with wide-eyed innocence. "Stop it, both of you." Xiaoman's voice cut through the air, sharp with frustration. "You've been bickering like children since you arrived, Lin Xian. It was an accident." "Zifeng, please be more careful. I have work to do." Cornered, humiliated, and with Lu Yao's threats ringing in his ears, Lin Xian felt a desperate need to push her away, to sever the bond that was becoming a liability. "Why do you even care?" he shot back, his voice harsher than he intended. "It's not like any of this is real. Our engagement is a sham. Remember, just an act for my grandfather. I'm just playing a part." The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. He saw the hurt flash in Xiaoman's eyes before she turned her back on him and stalked away toward the house. He immediately regretted it, but the damage was done. Later, he stood on the porch, trying to call his vice president, his voice low and urgent. This whole thing here was just a temporary arrangement to placate the old man. I can't let it jeopardize the company. Liu Yao is making her move, yes. I'll handle it. I have to end this. He didn't see Xiaoman standing just inside the doorway, a glass of water in her hand, having come to offer a truce. He didn't see her face drain of all color as she heard his clipped, dismissive words. The phrase "end this" struck her like a physical blow. It wasn't a defense mechanism. It was his truth. Everything, his softening gaze, his fumbling attempts to help, the quiet moments they'd shared had been part of the act. She stepped out onto the porch, her movements stiff. Lin Xian turned, his expression shifting from stressed to relieved when he saw her. But it was too late, so she began, her voice dangerously quiet. It really was all just a performance for you, wasn't it? He was thrown. Xiaoman, that's not saving face for your family. Acting out the part of the devoted fiancé. Her eyes, usually so warm, were now chips of ice. Was any of it real? Your kindness, your concern? Or were you just rehearsing for your next big corporate takeover? You don't understand, he said, taking a step toward her. It's complicated. She flinched back as if his touch would burn her. No, I think I understand perfectly now. She looked at him, the man from a world of glass towers and cutthroat deals, and saw only a stranger. You got what you wanted. You can tell your grandfather the act is over. She turned and walked back inside, shutting the door behind her with a soft, final click that echoed louder than a slam. Lin Xian stood alone in the encroaching darkness, trapped between a life he was forced to save and a life he was terrified of losing. The thin plastic walls of the remote greenhouse did little to keep out the encroaching night. A cold, persistent drizzle pattered against the roof, each drop a tiny drumbeat marking the hours since they had lost track of the village chief's runaway dog. A single, battery-powered lantern cast long, dancing shadows, illuminating Zhuang Xiaoman's worried face and Lin Xian's unusually pale one. I told you not to eat those, she admonished, her voice tight with a fear she refused to name. She pressed a cool, damp cloth to his forehead, which was slick with a feverish sweat. Lin Xian groaned, his head lolling against a sack of fertilizer. The crisp lines of his expensive suit were wilted and stained with mud, his usual air of controlled authority completely gone. They looked friendly, he mumbled, his eyes glassy and unfocused. He had plucked a handful of wild mushrooms near the greenhouse entrance an hour ago, dismissing her warnings with a city dweller's arrogance. Now, that arrogance was being paid for in full. He shivered, despite the humid air. Everything spinning. Xiaoman worked quickly, her initial anger dissolving into pure, pragmatic concern. She crushed a bitter-smelling herb she'd found nearby between two stones, mixing the paste with a little water from her canteen. Here, try to drink this. She lifted his head, cradling it with a gentleness that surprised them both. He was heavy, his vulnerability a tangible weight in her arms. He coughed, but managed to swallow some of the concoction, his gaze fixed on her with a strange intensity. You're angry, he whispered, his voice raspy. You're always angry with me. I'm not angry, she said softly, wiping a smudge of dirt from his cheek with her thumb. I'm worried. You're an idiot. Lin Xian, a faint, lopsided smile touched his lips. My grandfather calls me that too. His guard was not just down. It was obliterated. The poison had stripped away the layers of the CEO, leaving only the man beneath. He reached out, his hand clumsy, and his fingers brushed her arm, Don't avoid me, Shaman. Please, his voice cracked. When you look away, it feels like that big, empty office back in the city. So quiet. The words struck her with the force of a physical blow. She had held on to the belief that this was all a transaction, a charade they were both performing. But the raw, unguarded pain in his voice was undeniable. This wasn't the high and mighty Ed trying to manipulate her. This was a lonely man confessing a profound ache. In his delirium, he was telling her a truth he would never admit when sober. She felt the carefully constructed walls around her own heart begin to crumble. She had been pushing him away, determined to protect herself from the inevitable heartbreak when he left. But as she tended to him through the long, dark hours, cooling his fever, coaxing more herbal remedy into him, murmuring reassurances when he thrashed in his sleep, she could no longer deny the truth. Her feelings had become hopelessly entangled with his. This wasn't pretend anymore. When the first rays of dawn pierced through the grimy plastic, they found them in a silent tableau. Lin Xion was asleep, his fever broken, his breathing finally even. Shaman was slumped beside him, exhausted but awake, her hands still resting on his forehead. As his eyes fluttered open, they were clear for the first time in hours. He looked at her, at their surroundings, and a flicker of memory of his confession crossed his face. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. A new understanding, fragile and profound, settled between them in the quiet morning light. Later that day, after they had limped back to the village, another confession was waiting. Su Zifeng found Shaman by the old well. Checking the ropes, he held out a box, his expression a mixture of hope and desperation. I wanted you to have this. Inside was a state-of-the-art DSLR camera, a piece of equipment far beyond her means. It was the camera she had dreamed of, the one she told him about months ago. It was a thoughtful, generous and heartbreaking gift. Zifeng, she started, her heart aching for him. Don't say anything yet, he pleaded, his gaze earnest. I've watched you for years, Shaman. I've seen you build your business from nothing, seen how you care for this village. My feelings for you, they're not a childhood crush. I love you. I know I'm not some big shot CEO, but I'm here. I'll always be here. Let me be the one to support your dreams. A few days ago, his words might have tempted her. He represented safety, a shared history, a life she understood. But the night in the greenhouse had irrevocably changed her. It had provided a terrible, beautiful clarity. She gently pushed the box back towards him. Zifeng, you've always been like a younger brother to me, a dear friend. The words were kind, but they were also a firm, uncrossable line. This camera, it's an incredible gift, but I can't accept it. His face fell, the hope draining from his eyes. It's him, isn't it? Shaman looked towards the road leading out of the village, her expression honest and vulnerable. My head tells me it's a mistake, she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. He's from a different world. He'll leave, and I'm terrified of what will happen when he does. But I can't seem to lie to my own heart anymore. Su Zifeng absorbed the blow with a quiet dignity. He nodded slowly, a sad smile playing on his lips. I heard back from that photography program. They offered me a spot in Paris. He took a deep breath, the decision solidifying in his mind. I think I'm going to take it. Their farewell was bittersweet, a final, painful closing of a chapter. Be happy, Shaman, he said, his voice thick with emotion, before turning to walk away. From the porch of her small house, Lin Xion watched the exchange. He saw Su Zifeng's slumped shoulders as he left, and saw Shaman standing alone by the well, looking not at her departing friend, but towards him. A quiet, fierce sense of triumph surged through him. The rivalry was over. He had survived the poison, and now, he had survived his rival. He knew winning her trust would be a long, arduous journey, but for the first time, the path ahead was clear. He would not just win her heart, he would prove he was worthy of keeping it. The sun, a benevolent orb in the vast blue sky, warmed the rich earth of Dodong village. Its rays fell onto figures moving with a practiced rhythm through rows of vibrant green vegetables. Lin Xian, his tailored suit now a distant memory, wore a simple linen shirt, its sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms tan and toned from months of physical labor. He moved with an easy grace, his hands, once accustomed to signing billion-dollar contracts, now expertly tending to the delicate seedlings. Beside him, Zhuang Xiaoman worked with the same focused intensity, a small, contented smile playing on her lips. They barely needed to speak. A shared glance, a nod, the simple act of passing a water bottle, it was a language they had developed, a silent symphony of partnership. The villagers, once suspicious of the city slicker, now waved as they passed, their greetings warm and genuine. Lin Xian was no longer an outsider. He was simply Xiaoman's man. Later that afternoon, as they sat on the porch shelling peas, the rhythmic thump of pods hitting the metal bowl was the only sound between them. "Do you ever miss it?" Xiaoman asked quietly, not looking up from her task. Lin Xian paused, considering a pea pod in his hand. "To nose, the meetings that could have been emails, the feeling that you're running a race you've already won, but you can't stop." He tossed the pod aside and met her gaze, his eyes clear and sincere. "I thought I would. I thought this place," he gestured to the sprawling fields and distant mountains, "was a prison. But the only prison was the one I'd built for myself. Glass walls, a skyline view, and completely empty." He reached over, his calloused thumb gently brushing a stray piece of chaff from her cheek. "This is the first time I've ever felt free." His confession hung in the warm air, a testament to the profound shift within him. Xiaoman's heart swelled. The arrogant CEO who had arrived demanding to break their engagement was gone, replaced by this man who found freedom in the soul and contentment in her presence. Their quiet life was interrupted a few days later by the arrival of a sleek black car that looked entirely out of place on the village's dirt roads. An elderly man with a sharp suit and an even sharper gaze stepped out, leaning on a cane. It was Lin Xian's grandfather. He didn't announce his arrival, instead choosing to observe from a distance, watching his grandson effortlessly lift heavy crates and laugh with Xiaoman's father. He saw a man he hardly recognized, a man at peace. That evening, he cornered Lin Xian by the stream. "I came to bring you home," he stated, his voice firm. Lin Xian didn't flinch. "I am home, Grandpa." A slow smile spread across the old man's face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "I know," he said, his voice softening. "I never sent you here to break an engagement, you foolish boy. I sent you here to find a reason to live, not just exist. Your father built an empire, but he lost himself in it. I wasn't going to let that happen to you." He patted Lin Xian's shoulder, his approval a tangible weight. "That girl, she's good for you. She's grounded you." The truth of his grandfather's gambit settled over Lin Xian, not with anger, but with a profound sense of gratitude. The revelation paved the way for a celebratory dinner. The atmosphere in the Zhuang family home was transformed. Xiaoman's mother fussed over Lin Xian, piling his bowl high with food, while her father clapped him on the back, calling him son. The two grandfathers sat side by side, sharing a bottle of potent sorghum wine, their faces illuminated by the warm glow of the lamp. "You know," Xiaoman's grandfather began, his voice thick with nostalgia, "when we arranged this match, we weren't just thinking about our children. We were two young men with nothing but dreams, promising that if we ever made something of ourselves, our families would be bound together. It wasn't about assets or alliances. It was about friendship." Lin Xian's grandfather nodded, raising his glass. "It was a wish, a hope that our grandchildren would find in each other the same loyalty and support we found in our youth." He looked at Lin Xian and Xiaoman, his eyes misty. It seems our wish came true. Just not in the way we expected. It was a blessing, pure and simple. As Xiaoman's hand found his under the table, Lin Xian felt a sense of belonging he had never known. But just as the feeling solidified, his phone buzzed, a serpent in their Eden. The caller ID was Lu Yao. Excusing himself, he stepped outside into the cool night air. "Have you had enough of playing farmer?" Her voice was ice. "I'm calling a final board meeting. I have the votes to initiate a hostile takeover. Your family will lose everything, unless you're on the next flight back to the city." To me, the threat was real, the culmination of her long-held obsession. The Lin Corporation, his birthright, his entire former life, was on the line. A year ago, this call would have sent him into a panic. He would have capitulated, sacrificing anything for the company. But now, he looked through the window at the warm, firelit scene inside. He saw Xiaoman laughing, her face radiant. He saw the family that had embraced him. He saw his future. "The company is just a name on a building, Lu Yao," he said, his voice unwavering, devoid of any conflict. "You can have it. I found something real here, something you can't buy or take over." He didn't wait for a reply. He ended the call, severing the last tie to his old life with a single, decisive tap of his thumb. The next day, Lin Xian stood before the Dodong Village Committee, not as a former CEO, but as a dedicated partner. He unrolled a series of plans, detailed and meticulously researched, for a rural revitalization project. He spoke of sustainable agriculture, of creating a cooperative to bring their unique produce to high-end city markets, of ecotourism that would celebrate their way of life without destroying it. His vision was sharp, his business acumen undeniable, but his passion was what convinced them. It was a passion born from Xiaoman's love for her home, now filtered through his expertise. He wasn't just joining her world, he was helping her build its future. That evening, he led Xiaoman by the hand to the small, private greenhouse he had built at the edge of her family's property. Inside, the air was warm and humid, filled with the scent of earth and blooming flowers. Delicate orchids, his secret project, hung in the air, their petals a vibrant testament to his patience and care. He stopped in the center of the structure, turning to face her. The last light of dusk streamed through the glass panes, casting them in a golden glow. He took both of her hands in his. "When I first came here, I saw this place as of my life," he began, his voice low and earnest. "But I was wrong. It was the beginning." He looked into her eyes, his own reflecting a universe of emotion. "You taught me what it means to work for something, to nurture it, to watch it grow, not for profit, but for the joy of it. You didn't just change my surroundings, Xiaoman. You changed my soul." Tears welled in Xiaoman's eyes, shimmering in the twilight. She had watched this man shed his arrogance like a heavy coat, finding the warm, genuine heart underneath. She had fallen for him slowly, then all at once. "I love you," Lin Xian said, the words clear and absolute, not because of some old promise made by our grandfathers, but because you are the strongest, most compassionate, and most incredible person I have ever known. I want to build my life here, with you." A single tear traced a path down her cheek, but her smile was blinding. All the uncertainty, all the fear that he might one day leave, washed away in that moment. "I love you too, Lin Xian," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "You were always meant to be here." He leaned in and kissed her. A kiss that was not a conquest or a claim, but a promise. It was a promise of shared sunrises over the fields, of challenges met together, of a future blooming right where they stood, rooted in the rich soul of home.